Good afternoon. This is Sarah Honeydew for J&S Biblical Productions, April 2nd, 1790. About to get a rare interview with the minister in the Church of England, a former slave ship captain and author of the spiritual hymn, Amazing Grace. Please welcome Reverend John Newton.
Thank you, Miss Honeydew.
Good morning, or good afternoon. Reverend Newton, you probably had so many experiences as a slave ship captain and then converting to Christianity that I don't know where exactly to start. But our viewers are probably most interested in the event that turned you from the Atlantic slave trade into a man of God. Let's start there.
Miss Honeydew, this will be hard to believe because my father, who was a merchant sea captain, convinced me to join the British Royal Navy, which I later deserted not too long after, and got interested in the Atlantic slave trade. That was about as far from God and religion as it is possible to get. I was opposed to my Christian faith, but my father was a Catholic and my mother a Presbyterian. I had denounced God as a myth.
So that sounds as if you had reached the bottom. Now, what turned you around?
In March of 1748, our ship, the Greyhound, a slave ship, was caught in a North Atlantic storm, a violent storm, and the crewman next to me was washed overboard. The animals were lost in the sea, we had no drinking water, and we had a huge hole in the bow. I said to the captain, if this will not do, then may the Lord have mercy on us. 2 weeks later, when the battered ship was tied up in Low Swilly, Ireland, those words uttered in a moment of despair were still with me. I began to wonder if I was worthy of God's mercy. I felt that God had sent me a profound message and was beginning to work through me.
That's awesome that you felt that connection. So then what happened?
Before answering that question, I continued in the slave trade for another 3 trips to Africa. I used to write obscene poems and songs about the captain. I also put down several slave revolts. Slaves were often lashed, and sometimes thumbscrews were used. After a serious illness, I quit the wretched business in 1754.
Well, all right. So then what happened after that?
It was then I settled down in Liverpool with my wife, Polly, and got involved in the religious community. Some friends suggested that I apply for the priesthood. I was turned down twice by the Bishop of Chester, but after 7 years, the Earl of Dartmouth, impressed by my story, sponsored me for ordination, and I was offered the curacy in the village of Olney in the Church of England. It was there I met the poet, William Cowper, and collaborated with him on a book of hymns in which Amazing Grace first appeared in print. This was how I described my relationship with God.
Yes, and I definitely want to get to that. But first, before we hear the story of Amazing Grace, did you have any regrets about your years in the slave trade?
Yes, absolutely. After my preaching was so popular, I regretted my involvement in the trade. After I became the rector of St. Mary, Woolmouth, my advice was sought by many people, including a member of Parliament, William Wilberforce, who was thinking of leaving politics to go into the ministry. I encouraged him to stay where he was and serve God in Parliament. He took my advice and spent the rest of his life working toward the abolition of slavery.
Well, that shows that you did make an impressive effect on your former trade. What about your own involvement in the slave trade?
Well, I was still feeling that I needed to do something personal to make amends to God. So in 1797, I wrote a paper supporting the campaign to end slavery, which was called Some Thoughts on the African Slave Trade, which graphically depicted the horrors of the slave trade and my personal role in it.
Well, that is really making up for the damage for your participation in the slave trade. Now, about Amazing Grace, can you tell us where that comes in?
Well, that was written for a sermon given on New Year's Day in 1773. It was actually my autobiography in song and poetry and soon came into print in 1779. It expressed what I learned from studying about Christianity with the message that forgiveness and redemption are possible regardless of the sins committed, and that the soul can be delivered from despair through the mercy of God.
Wow, Reverend Newton, you've come such a long way from the African slave trade, and your conversion is remarkable. Before we end off, I want to have our listeners hear the words to Amazing Grace in song, if you will.
Yes. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will bring me home.